Hello, and welcome to the Shepherds and Kings podcast. My name is Jacob Trelaw, and I'm the founder and the host of this podcast. I'd like to welcome you today. If this is your first time listening, we appreciate you stopping by, and if you've listened for a couple episodes now, we're glad you're back. Shepherds and Kings is all about looking at the life of David, not exclusively, but using him as a jumping off point to become a better man and a better Christian. Whether you're a shepherd and that's all you ever be, that's what God has called you to be, we want you to be the best shepherd you can be. But if God calls you to increase and to become a king, or again, there's plenty of other things that David was and plenty of other roles that you have in your life, we want you to be the best in those areas that you can be as well. We've got a special guest for you today. His name is Chuck Holton, and he's actually one of the reasons that this podcast exists. When my son was born 5 years ago now, I went online to find some resources about raising a son. His book was the first one I picked up, Making Men, which we talk about today. But read through the book, looked in the back of the book, and there were some other recommendations, some other resources, some other books he had, and so I got some more books and found some podcasts, and eventually led me to doing this, and God impressing on my heart to start this podcast. I'm super excited to share this conversation with you. He's a super interesting guy and has done everything and been everywhere, and I know you'll enjoy this conversation. Our guest today is Chuck Holton. He's an Army Ranger turned stockbroker who is now a best-selling author of 7 books. He's a journalist and war correspondent, a public speaker, an all-around adventurer, as well as a husband and a father of 5. It's good to have you with us today.
Yeah, you're a little behind on your intro there. I'm up to 10 books now.
10 books, holy cow! Okay, that's awesome. I know you collaborated with Oliver North. That's including those books?
Right. Yeah, that's so I worked with him on several. I try to write as a business, so I try to write things people will actually want to read, and so I've done everything from fiction, nonfiction, biography, you name it.
Great. So take us back to the beginning of your manhood journey, if you want to call it that. Was there like a light bulb moment for you where you kind of said, here's the kind of Christian man I need to be, or was there a gradual process that led you to a realization?
No, I think it was just a process of smashing into walls and doing lots of things wrong, and learning the hard way. I'm kind of one of those people that kind of was not smart enough to learn from other people's examples very often. I typically had to try it myself and find out why it didn't work. So I'm not proud of that, but as a young man, especially my time in the military, I basically ran around and made every mistake I could, and learned from those painful experiences. As John Wayne liked to say, life's tough, but it's tougher if you're stupid.
Right. Is that sort of a motivation for you to write, especially towards younger men? I know you mentioned a little bit about that in Prowess.
Right. Yeah, very much so. This is kind of a way that I feel like maybe God can redeem the mistakes of my past, is by helping other young men not make those same mistakes.
Sure. So you've gone through, we talked about and mentioned some of those life changes, career changes that you've gone through. Can you kind of walk us through your mindset between all of those? Those are kind of major changes. And I also, if I have my information on this correct, you've, moved many times and now are living in Panama, also West Virginia. Is that correct?
Yeah, I live in Panama full time, and
Okay.
we have a home in West Virginia that we visit for about a month in the summer every year. So after I left the military and went to college, I flew helicopters in the National Guard while I was in college. Thought maybe I'd want to do that for a career, but very quickly found out it's not as glamorous as it sounds. It's more like being a glorified taxi driver, and it wasn't very exciting. So I got the opportunity to become a stockbroker because the father of one of my Ranger buddies was a broker and offered me the job. he showed me, he taught me a lot that my parents had not been able to teach me about the time value of money and, just anything financial related. This guy had a big pile of money, and it's, if you want to learn about money, learn it from somebody who's been very successful at it. It's a good way to do it.
Sure.
So he kind of took me under his wing, made me a partner in his business. And so I worked for him for about 10 years and made lots and lots of money. And I had all these very wealthy clients who at some point said to me, I just wish I'd spent more time with my kids. And I was starting my family, had several little kids at that point, and sort of realized that I was heading down that same path. The brokerage business is a very fast-paced lifestyle more than a job. And I left the house about the time my kids woke up in the morning, and I came home about the time they went to bed. And so they knew there was this man that lived in the house named Daddy, but they didn't really know much about me, and I didn't really have time to pour into them like I wanted to. And I made a realization at some point that that wasn't the life I wanted, that there was this very short window of time when my kids would be young and malleable and would want to spend time with me. And that for that short window of time, I wanted to be there, and I wanted to pour into them. And maybe after that, when there comes that day when your kids wake up and decide that you're a drooling moron and don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. So when that day came, then I could always go back and make all the money I wanted. But in between, there was no amount of money in the world that would be worth missing out on that time with my kids. So I started praying about it. Lord, show me a way that I can restructure my life to not have that regret. And one of the ways that the Lord brought me was to start diversifying my cash flow, finding other ways to bring in money. Most people just have one form of cash flow, their job, and I was no different. All of not only my income, but my benefits, my stock options, my retirement plan, my health insurance, everything was all tied up in that same brokerage job. And so I had to do what the job required, and I was kind of a slave to that. So I started looking for ways to diversify my cash flow so that I could get out from under that. The writing was one way I did that. There were some other investments we made and things that helped. And long story short, it finally came to a point where God started to make it clear that he wanted me to go full time as a writer. And that's a scary proposition because Christian writers, many people don't know this, but even popular Christian writers probably don't make enough money to live on. It's not a really profitable business, and it's a good side hustle, perhaps, but you don't make enough money writing books to live on typically. But God was making it very clear that's what he wanted me to do. And I was telling God, wait, God, you're making a mistake here. I said, I'm going to starve to death. I can't fulfill my duty to provide for my family being a writer. And God was saying, no, I want you to be a full-time writer. And I remember a moment, I was at a writer's conference, and I got a chance to sit next to Randy Alcorn, who's kind of one of my heroes. He's a well-known Christian author. Sat next to him on a bus going to dinner, and I explained to him my dilemma. I felt God was calling me to write full time, but I knew I couldn't make enough money at it. And what should I do? Because I have this responsibility biblically to provide for my family. And Randy looked at me and said, "Wait a minute, who's been providing for your family all this time, all along?" And I said, okay, well, I get where you're going with that. Of course, it's the Lord who provides for me and my family. And he said, it's your job to be obedient. It's not your job to provide for your family. It's your job to be obedient to the Lord's calling in your life. And if you'll be obedient, then would you rather be a writer with God's blessing or be a stockbroker without it? And I thought, ooh, okay, that makes sense. So I went, and I'm kind of hard-headed. So I said, Lord, look, I just want to make sure that this is not I know my heart is deceitful and wicked. I just want to make sure that this is not my heart leading me astray because I want to be famous or something. So give me some kind of confirmation that this is what you want me to do, and I'll do it. Well, I had been writing a series of articles for Focus on the Family, and I had made contact with an older guy that I wanted to interview, and I just contacted him one time. But he called me back, not long after that, and he said, Mr. Holton, I feel really weird about this because I never do this sort of thing, but I just feel really strong that I'm supposed to give you a message. And I said, oh, okay, what's that? And he said, well, I was in business for 40 years and I made millions of dollars. And then he started to cry on the phone. And he said, but you know what? I would give up every penny today to spend one more hour with my son who just died of cancer at age 39. And now he's like sobbing into the phone. And he's like, I don't know why, but I just feel like I'm supposed to tell you not to make that mistake. So I said, okay, Lord, I can take a hint, So I went in the next day to the office and talked to my partner. I understand he was grooming me to take over his business, and he made about $250,000 a month. So that's what I was giving up. And told him, look, I got to go. And he said, what? And so I explained everything that had happened. And he said, well, to be honest with you, I regret not spending more time with my kids too. So even that much money was not enough to get rid of that regret. So it made me feel like I'd really done the right thing. And I went full time as a writer. We really struggled for a while, took about a 90% pay cut. And just over time, God started bringing little opportunities. I've got an opportunity to kind of start working as a journalist a little bit. That came out of the blue. That was just something God brought to me. I didn't pursue it. And long story short, within about a year's time, we were in a much better financial position than we had been when I'd been making all that money, even though I wasn't making all that money anymore. It just got through just a miraculous set of circumstances, paid off our house, got us a new house that was much bigger, paid off all our debts, all our bills. It was amazing. And Randy was right when he said, would you rather be obedient and have God's blessing, or do what you want to do and not have it? So that was a really good learning experience for sure.
In Making Men, you talk about the SHAPE acronym. Can you break that down a little bit for us?
Sure. Basically, what I tried to do was to come up with a curriculum for young men to teach them the facets of a good man, how to be a man in the most simple, easy to understand form possible. And I just took all of the accumulated wisdom that I picked up from older men that I interviewed, from the biblical stories of men who did it right and men who did it wrong, and then from the manhood rituals of ancient Romans, Greeks, Hebrews, Spartans, you name it. Because just about every ancient culture had a manhood ritual. So I tried to kind of boil down all of the similarities of those things to their kind of most foundational precepts, and then create an acronym out of that could function as a measuring stick for a young man. Because young men, at some point, they all start to ask themselves that question, like, what do I have to do to know that I'm a man and to let the world know that I'm a man? And a lot of the unhealthy behaviors we see young men engage in are just them trying to answer that question. So for my own sons, I wanted them to have a solid measuring stick, something better than my own flawed example to look at when they started to ask that